Okay, hello everyone, and hope everybody had a good Labor Day weekend. Welcome to our fall series of the Rocky Mountain Map Society, although it doesn't feel like fall at all, but eventually we'll get here. Hello everyone over there in Zoom land. We have a good showing from out there on this lecture that is going to be a unique topic that we have not explored before, and it's going to be interesting. We'll let Naomi Heiser introduce our speaker in a moment. So Naomi, you want to come here and tell us a little bit about that and then introduce our speaker?
Okay. So let me introduce Tim Hagaman, who has made a long journey up here from Mora, New Mexico, and we're pleased that he's here. He's also here for the Rocky Mountain Book and Paper Fair, so if anyone is interested in that, I'm sure he'd be happy to talk with you about that. So there was a lot of information about Tim that went out in the emails. I'm just going to read you a few interesting facts that didn't make it in there. One is that he's lived in New Mexico since 1984. And he and his wife, Ellen, they live on the Mora River in an 1880 New Mexico adobe house. He's a Western Americana speaker and expert, and he has his own collection, which he's willing to help researchers with and share it on loan to museums and libraries. Something else interesting is that he purchased the Wortley Hotel in Lincoln, New Mexico, and managed it for 10 years. It was once owned by Lincoln County Sheriff Pat Garrett, who's buried in Las Cruces. I'm sure everyone knows that story. He also has lived on every major cattle trail, including Texas Road, Shawnee, Chisholm, Goodnight Loving, Chisholm, Stinson, Western, and Santa Fe Trail. And there's a really neat map in the back that has the cattle trails on it. I think Wes brought it, right? The other thing that you should know is that he and Rex Buckman of NMSU Extension Office in Fort Sumner established the last ride of Billy the Kid, an annual 125-mile trail ride from Lincoln to Fort Sumner. There's so much here, and you'll tell us stories, Tim, some of the rest of the really interesting work that you do. So please come on up and let us know about the rangeland. Thank you. Oops. Thank you.
Okay, so let me get this one as close as there.
Good evening. As a member of the Rocky Mountain Map Society, it's a pleasure to be here tonight. You know, it was just a few years back that I attended the map fair at the library across the street. And it was there where I became serious as a map collector. So I'm hoping that we can pick up some new map collectors tonight. We have my nephew in 6th grade, I think. And it's very important to ask people what they collect. And the slide before, this was a picture from Santa Fe this last week for our Zozobra. And this is one of our most unique events in New Mexico. And I encourage you to attend. This is where the fire is in his mouth, starting the dramatic event in Santa Fe to say goodbye to some of the sins of our last year of our lives. And one of the things that about New Mexico that is unique is if you're in the hottest ticket in tourism is at the spaceport, where we are putting people up into space right now. So hope to have you visit New Mexico. Tonight, I'll be speaking on the economic development impact on cartography from the range industry. And one of the things that I'm very proud of is throughout my entire life, I've been playing cowboys and Indians. And I have proof tonight, 1965, kindergarten, stagecoach drawing. Our mothers always know when to give us something and take care of it, much like a brittle map. So this was in grade school in Peoria, Illinois, where I was raised. And luckily I had a very excellent parents that gave me some interest in my life. And one of them was learning about the cattle industry. And my father was an animal nutritionist. I graduated from Michigan State, and I got to help him in our station wagon deliver different types of products to stockyards. And I had an opportunity to see the Peoria stockyards and take a limousine to the state fair in Springfield. So a lot of that interest has led me to the Wild West. And this is my favorite lithograph. Most of the items that I'll be showing you chronologically are all in my collection. There are a few one-of-a-kind items that are not. But this is the Great Rocky Mountain Show. This was just a year after Buffalo Bill was out on the trail, establishing his Wild West show. And this was the first competitor the next year in 1884. And this is a lithograph from Phelps and Plows out of Chicago. Definitely a one of a kind, where this Montana show went through North Dakota, South Dakota, down through Minnesota and Wisconsin, and ended their show in Chicago. So this represents my collection. My interest is in Wild West. So growing up, we learn how to read a map, and I had the opportunity of being encouraged to become a Boy Scout. And in 1973, I had a chance to go to the Minnesota Canadian Wilderness, and this represents the lakes that I had a chance to learn how to read this map and understand the miles that I had to carry a canoe from portage to portage. So luckily, I still have this map in my collection, and really enjoyed looking at it recently. There are a lot of 70s colors to it, and this is in 73. So my next trek as a Boy Scout was as an Eagle Scout to Philmont Scout Ranch. Is probably the greatest tourism draw in northeastern New Mexico, where I am located on the Front Range of New Mexico. And this was in 1974 that I had a chance to do my first trek. And this gives you an example of books that have maps on the front covers, as well as the detailed map that we used during our 10-day trek through Philmont. One of the things that I learned during COVID is that COVID took over my library. And it's wonderful to be out and meeting people and learning what your specialty is in maps. And I'm glad to share that with you tonight on the back table, as well as in my presentation. We've been quite busy down in Mora. We had the state's largest wildfire just last year. And this is a view from our house. So this reminds me of, do you have an emergency plan for your collection? I sure didn't. It's not a good time to call the university and say, well, you come get my collection, when there's a wildfire that prevents any cars from coming into your area. So I know that Denver and New Mexico have been hit hard by natural disasters. So ask yourself and put together an emergency plan on how you would handle that type of situation. I owe everything to the Native Americans. They have been the stewards of this land, and I always think of this as their homeland. I've had the opportunity to be a tribal liaison since 2000, working with tribal since 1984 with the Navajo Nation and Hickoryas. And this is an example of a 9th plate ambrotype Native American Plains Plateau in a rare case from 1860. Very proud people with a wonderful sense of humor and very ambitious with economic development, but also taking care of our natural resources. When we look back at how do we interpret the French and the Spanish in America, one of my oldest maps is Jacques Nicolas Bellin. This is his carte de Florida de la Louisiana, 1757. Much of this would resemble the Pike expedition, as well as the interpretation of the West and the East molding together. When we look at the first Spanish history, we go back to the Cabeza de Vaca, who arrived in Florida and ended up on this Louisiana, Texas, Gulf of Mexico. And then later, Coronado entered into New Mexico, and part of my collection is exhibited at the Pueblo of Acoma. And I had a chance to speak on the benefits of the livestock industry that have benefited their homelands, and that they are in the brand book of 1884. So one of the things that I love about this map is it interprets the hometown that I grew up in Peoria. It shows the military posts, the Fort Creve Coeur, and Fort St. Louis is where the Starved Rock is, near on the Illinois River. So it's just Hennepin also included Peoria in his interpretation of the LaSalle exploration in his maps, but really love this interpretation. As we look at the explorers coming up through Mexico and along the Gulf Coast, and we really take advantage of the first cattle that are brought into Texas and New Mexico. This particular Spanish building is in San Antonio. We just visited there last month in July, and I think Zebulon Pike would have come through that particular. It was the captain's house, the Spanish. So it's a terrific museum, and I encourage you to visit there. So much of the lands are becoming longhorn cattle at that point, and they are the original native animal to our country, as well as our bison. This is my wife Ellen visiting tonight with us, where we're visiting our brother in Arvada, and we got a chance to go throughout all the San Antonio missions to learn about how they housed livestock in their fenced rock yards, and became really the first ranchers of the community. And in 1825, there was a law encouraging the local landowners to raise cattle. And obviously there was a tax. So there's always an incentive with any type of public offering. And this is a map of South Texas. And many of those ranches are being populated by animals, and many of the Spanish and Mexican land grants are being established. And those are incentives to create economic development and build and increase capital investment and create jobs in these territories that the Spanish and the Mexican kings were giving to some of these families. And at this point, about 1804, Zebulon Pike is at Kaskaskia, Illinois. And this is a copy of his book that was out of the William Reese collection that I purchased. That he is in purchasing his book at a sale in Kaskaskia, and it's part of the military regiment that's located, had owned it from, the copy is from 1895. So at that time, Zebulon Pike, who is named after Pikes Peak, was in the Ohio River Valley and was spending very ambitious to become a explorer and like his father in the military. And right here we show Kaskaskia and some of the communities that are on the Ohio River and the Mississippi River. Zebulon Pike went on to discover the northern part of the Mississippi and meet with the Native Americans, and LaSalle founded the southern part of the Mississippi River. And so from the standpoint of Mississippi economic development, it's about ready to take off in regards to the explorers being provided by Thomas Jefferson. And at this point in 1838, the Mitchell's map of the United States from Philadelphia has been issued, and it is a beautiful map of with coloring, and establishes everything east of the Mississippi, but also adds Missouri and Arkansas and Texas that's becoming a republic. And so in this map, we have Kaskaskia on the left-hand side, where it says Kaskaskia across from Genevieve. And some of the explorers out west are from Genevieve, such as Lucian Maxwell, who established the Maxwell Land Grant in northern New Mexico in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. And then we also had Jim East, who is writing his biography of right now, who was raised in the Kaskaskia area. And Charles Goodnight is from this the middle part of Illinois, as well as many of the other heroes that we write about in the Wild West. So to the right is the Ohio River, and with the interpretation of moving steamboats up and down that river. And a lot of the cattle were brought up from New Orleans, and they were established in Galveston, Houston, heading to New Orleans on steamboats and pushing cattle up to Cairo, Illinois on the Mississippi, and selling on government contracts to various military locations along the Mississippi River. One of the first northern cattle rides was by Piper out of Texas, 1920s. He pushed 1,000 head of cattle northern route through the Shawnee Trail through Missouri, Quincy, Illinois, through Champaign. I've got a business directory that shows the many of the ranchers from the Champaign area, which were the largest cattle operators of their time out of Champaign. So Illinois was a huge area for investment in stock dealings with Texas and Missouri. And then in Indiana, my family was established in the covered bridge area of Carthage, those in the eastern part on the Wabash River. And we had one of our ancestors die of moving cattle across the Wabash. And so it's pretty cool to know that I have a family member that was involved with the livestock industry. And then that driver pushed his cattle all the way to Ohio, and with 1,000 head of cattle. And we also had a 15-year-old working for his father out of the Illinois area that pushed his first cattle drive as a 15-year-old for his father, and became the largest stockman in Illinois. So most of the cattle movement is moving east toward where the populations are in Philadelphia, New York. The steamboats were heading out of Savannah, or the ships for Havana, England. They were putting meat in barrels full of salt. So those were some of the earliest trade of meat from those slave areas of the eastern ports of eastern United States. Right here in Chicago, we talked about the Kankakee River area and the Wabash River area. Illinois had plenty of water for their stock. And then Peoria is established, and right in the left-hand side there. And that became the largest stockyards in the United States after the Chicago stockyards closed in the 70s and 80s. And Hennepin is identified here. So about 1846, we've got one of the first Anglo maps of New Mexico by Kearney and Emery and Abert, and many of those Peck were involved with this map. It's a wonderful interpretation of the Native Americans surrounding the Pueblo areas that were dominant in regards to the land at that point. But it does give you some great topography of the Sagre de Cristo Mountains, Taos, Santa Fe, Mora, Pecos, and at the same time, the Illinois Central Company in the 1850s was being established in Illinois, and Abraham Lincoln was their attorney in 1857 to 1860. And at that time, he was helping the company that was having a difficult time with the longest railroad in the world at that time of 700 miles. And he was putting together incentives for the railroad and working with the state legislature of Illinois to establish taxes that would be beneficial to the railroad, but would be an incentive to increase cities. So at that time, there was 2.5 million acres of land that became available through federal grants to the United States. And this is the first time that had been available to railroads. So they were able to finance their entire line wherever they wanted to go from Chicago to Cairo. And then they had the incentive of developing land along that road and be able to make these and sell that land or lease that land to increase paying off their debt. This state of New Mexico went through that with railroad men also, and that's why we have an anti-donation clause in New Mexico. This just became available on the market, this Pony Express lithograph. It's just stunning. So I had to put it in. I just saw it a week ago. So at this time, the Pony Express is just active in the Plains states for just a couple of years. And to the right is we've got Lucian Maxwell, who we talked about from Kaskaskia. He is being rewarded with an incentive that the United States is providing in depredations. So if there were any cattle that were killed by Indians, they would pay the claimant for that loss. So that was an incentive that encouraged cattle raising, and Lucian Maxwell was one of the biggest in Cimarron, New Mexico, where his legacy is the grist mill that still exists, that the CS Ranch owns and operates during the summer for the boys going to and girls going to the Philmont Scout Ranch. At this time, Kansas City is on the map in regards to their investment with their depot and population growth along the Missouri River. Lewis and Clark have opened up the floodgates in regards to development and the growth heading out west. There's a lot of violence going on also. This is a Quantrell issue of the massacre in Lawrence at that time. So there's a lot of issues going on with during the Civil War and after the Civil War with the violent men. We call them Jayhawkers in the Missouri. This is one of the coolest inscriptions I've ever seen on a map, and I've never seen one before when I bought it. And some of the maps that I'm showing tonight, like this, I bought at the Rocky Mountain Book Fair and Paper Fair that will be held on Friday and Saturday at Castle Rock. So this is inscribed by Lieutenant James Sampson, and he is doing for the Corps of Engineers. This gentleman I met tonight is an engineer, and he signed it. And this particular book is from Omaha heading west on the Union Pacific line, and they're building bridges and roads, and there's about 5-6 maps in there, and they're all inscribed by Lieutenant Simpson. You can see an example there down on the left-hand side where it shows the Union General Road there. We've got many of the bridges that have to go over the Potawatomi and from Omaha to Nebraska. So it's a terrific engineering report that is provided by the Corps of Engineers. At this time, we see a map of the northern Missouri, Hannibal and St. Joseph Railroad lands. Hannibal is in Missouri, is across from the Quincy, established so that they can have a railroad that leaves Illinois into Missouri and Iowa. At this time, 1862, we've got a lot of development right here in Denver with this pen and ink sketch. And at that time, Elf and Henderson are developing their ranch inventory here. Henderson is a supplies man in Denver that is bartering liquor and whatever he can in groceries to establish his 20,000 head of cattle. John Elf on the Mormon Road is getting established at this time also, and becomes the biggest rancher and stockman of Colorado. This is a plaque of John Chisholm's ranch near Painted Rock, Texas. And he's from Paris, Texas, and he's established his ranch along the Concho River in West Texas right during the Civil War. And much of his cattle were all driven to market to places like St. Louis and Kansas City and whatever steamboats from New Orleans. At this time, the crossing of the Horsehead Crossing in Texas is established for the much of the traffic was coming through here. And this is where the Goodnight and Loving Trail turned on its way up through the Pecos up into New Mexico. And Ellen and I had a chance to visit this location and Horsehead Crossing. And this is an easy place to take the cattle as they're pushing them to markets up in Colorado and New Mexico and Fort Sumner that are being established by the military government at this time. And the same trail heads to California and for other public use. Right here in the United States territory, this map shows the title next to Florida, and then some of the population and ranching development in Southern California. It's a U.S. Land Office annual report, and in the 1860s. So in 1865, the Union Stockyards was established, and back in the back you can see the first design of this stockyards from 1865. And like this engineer in the audience, it was done by an engineering company in Chicago. So it's as close to a map of what the stockyards would look like, and all the necessary infrastructure that is needed right there along the water and the railroad tracks. And just a fantastic piece. At this time in 1867, the Shawnee Arbuckle Trail is being established in Oklahoma, and that particular trail was known as the Chisholm Trail. But a lot of the cattle trails to the north were going through Missouri, Sedalia, Missouri, up to Quincy and Hannibal. And in 66, 67, they were establishing the route to Abilene. So James McCoy, he was the architect of the marketing the Chisholm Abilene Trail and establishing stockyards right there in Abilene, right off the Union Pacific Eastern Division. And in '68, he went to the Convention of Cattlemen Commissioners, and he had just done the entire trail himself with his stock people that he had recruited to use the trail. The most that we're going trail were 333,000 head of cattle, and then about in receipts, and then 300,000 in head. So the Convention of Cattle Commissioners was held in Springfield, Illinois, in the same state house as Abraham Lincoln, and they were talking about incentives and creating more capacity for economic development as cattle commissioners. And Mr. McCoy of Kansas said in regards to, they were talking about the Texas fever, and at this time longhorns were being brought up through the summer months to the northern markets, and leaving blood contact with the clean cattle of the north. And this was only done in the summertime. So Mr. McCoy asked the commissioners to say, in regards to whether or not the cattle are coming up this way of Abilene and the disease, I feel somewhat interested. In June of 1867, I went and found a place somewhere beyond the settlements and point where the cattle of the Southwest, particularly Texas, might be driven unmolested. My idea was to establish from which a Texas man with Texas cattle might stand at, even choosing a greater than to market undisturbed. So it was determined that they could create a certification, and the commissioner from Indiana recommended that they would be able to certify a herd of cattle if they had been wintered through the winter months. And then if that was the case, they could ship the cattle at any time. So protected the northern cattle. This is one of two copies of the Convention of Cattle Commissioners, only one in private hands. And then at this time, the railway guide shows the markets of the East, Philadelphia and New York, where 1 million people are living in New York, and they need to get that cattle out east to those population areas. And we're already to Missouri. This is in 1870, the same time that Denver has, the railroad has arrived from Cheyenne, and also into Denver. This is our country, the Atlantic and the Pacific, through Hannibal and St. Joseph, the shortest route in the West. I have that in the back of the room to look at. So we're getting to the point where a lot of the markets are being served by the railroad, and we're establishing railroad heads, basically where the you could have a railroad line go straight to your stockyards and not be on the main line, so they could do short hauls for the railroad. And right here in the cram maps, I have all the cram maps in the 70s except one, but most of them really are fascinating, how long it took the railroad to get through Kansas. And Dodge City was the #1 main line for the Western Trail, heading from Woodward through Kansas into Fort Dodge, and then on up to Ogallala, Nebraska. And then the Chicago, Burlington, Quincy. This is 1870. And then I have an 1878 that shows all the Pullman comforts that some tourists that are populating the West. And then this is the Ross map. He was a map man in St. Louis, and I have his Arkansas and his Kansas in 1871. In 1870, the United States is just booming with business. They had doubled the amount of businesses in the country in 1870. So it shows in the maps, and this was in 1871 for Ross. What I like about this Ross map in 1871 is that it shows the Texas Cattle Trail right in the middle, heading to Abilene. So there are just a few maps that interpret the cattle trails. And this is a full cram map here, railroad map of 1873. So it shows that the rail lines are moving farther to Colorado, but it sure takes a long time. But and it also interprets the Indian Territory and the Cherokee Strip down below. At this time, this particular map is one of, I know of only one. I observed this at the Haley Library in Midland, Texas last month, and had a chance to photograph it. It's a great map for the Kansas Pacific Railway, and they show the Texas stock route from San Antonio that really starts in Beeville, in Corpus Christi, and some of the outlying areas of South Texas, and moves its way all the way up to Abilene there. And then it also has some local commercial value to the region. The man to the left is James East, and he's in the white long shirt, and I'm writing his biography. He came from Kaskaskia and took the steamboat down to New Orleans, and then ended up in the San Antonio area in Seguin, where he's worked moving cattle to New Orleans. And then he works for Kennedy and the King Ranch down in South Texas, near Beeville also. And this particular picture shows his deputy after he moved up to Tascosa, Texas, where he became Oldham's sheriff. And he's shown holding the 6-gun shooter Colt in his hand, and he died the next day of being shot by someone else's Colt. This Tracy Guide map is of St. Louis, showing the continued growth of maps and businesses. And the man that sold this to me recently died in being killed in Boston by a car. And appreciated his. A bridge goes over the Mississippi in St. Louis. Eventually, the area, that beautiful stone bridge that still is used today for going from the main St. Louis to the East St. Louis. And at this time, the St. Louis Stockyards Charter is established to create a stockyards in that area called the National Stockyards. And then we continue with the Missouri Pacific and the Atlantic Pacific from St. Louis all the way to the mountains. And And then the Drovers Hotel in Pueblo shows Charles Goodnight checking into the hotel there. So a lot of them are still working the trails and the stagecoaches along the Front Range. And many of them are starting to use brands. The Morley map from Cimarron, Ray Morley. He has Kingman helping him. Kingman was a draftsman that I'll talk about a little later. And then Melvin Mills is a rancher that I moved from Ontario. Mora is established with many of the penitente communities at this time. The land grants that were given by the Spain and Mexico, and some of the most unique religions were practiced in these moradas, and we celebrate them on Easter weekend every year, where we walk from morada to morada and sing the songs. Anton Chico land grant established on the Pecos River is the largest land grant in New Mexico. Many of the ranchers are taking those cattle brands to county courthouses to have them registered. So this is our old courthouse in Mora, where this interprets where they would register them. And Fort Union's influence with Wheeler's map in 1877 in Sangre de Cristo Mountains. We're seeing Asher Adams' map of New Mexico at that time in 1873. 74, Missouri, Kansas, and Texas line from Chicago down to Galveston. I love this newsletter. It's a newspaper that has the map and has advertising. Talks about the Great Southwest, where investors can become stockmen and establish ranches. Most of the cowboys did not become the stockmen and the cattlemen. The cattlemen mostly came from syndicates and English, Irish, Welsh, various other investment that could be had in the East. And so a lot of the bankers were out of Boston and England. This is the system of parks in the southern part of Alamosa area, and also the Maxwell Land Grant, and then the eastern part of Pueblo, where Charles Goodnight has established his ranch. He's become a banker. He loses the bank, but continues to build capacity. He's got a wonderful barn there that you can visit. It's now a museum. And in 1876, we got the New Mexico territory through the U.S. Land Office interpreting one of the towns right on the southern part of the map, where it shows the land office, and that is no, this is an interpretation of Clayton at the time, where the Fort Worth Denver Railroad is being built in preparation for the next year. A.Z. Huggins map of New Mexico. This was out of Chicago, New York, the New Mexico Stock and Agricultural Associates, 1876. It looks a lot like the Morley map. It's got a little bit more color to it. Shows the land grants and the Indian reservations. And this particular map was in the title company for many years. used in Harding County. Down on the right shows the Chisholm Ranch, and he's working with the Irish in regards to selling some of his ranches at that time, investment. And then we've got the Lincoln, where Fort Stanton in the Ruidoso area. And Lincoln will become a county at this time. And many of the ranchers are having mercantile wars at that time in regards to competition. In 1877 in California, we've got this ranch house that was a painting. It looks a lot like the French French painter that was living in that area, Leon Trousset. And he had many of his paintings that were sold in saloons for beers. And he has many in New Mexico that we covet. Jim East and his wife get married, and she comes down from Dodge City, and they're establishing families, and they're growing these ranches. He becomes a manager and foreman of the L.E. and Lee Scott Ranch, and additional syndicates that are buying up very large pieces of land. We've got Prower out of Animas. At that time, we see continued growth in Kansas City. Right here, 1879 on the left is the American cattle first interpretation and a map of cattle country in 79. And it's on the other side of this lithograph of the Beef and Canning Company in 1880. So even this particular company, the Arbuckle Company, was investing in the syndicate in a lot of the stockyards and packing companies to create investment. And this is their way of doing it through promotional items. Chicago has been able to get out of the reinvestment after the fire. And this is the growth of the stockyards to the left. Billy the Kid is in Silver City at this point. We call him COVID Kid now. This is a picture of him in Silver City just a year ago that we saw this window. And this is a recent article of him being in the Silver City Black Range area. We've got the Kansas City stockyards to the right on the bottom there along the Missouri River. And then St. Paul is investing in depot for the northern routes, and huge cattle stockyards in St. Paul, just south of the river here, where it shows the steamboat lands. And this is a beautiful railroad hand-painted map of St. Paul that gives us great detail of the investment going on in St. Paul. I was talking to the gentleman about surveyors today, and he's a surveyor. This is a story of Powell and Kingman. And in 1883 in Silver City, New Mexico, they made this map. And whenever you're looking at a map, always ask the question whether it's been preserved or not. This is what the map looked like before I bought it. And they did a terrific job of preservation and conservation. And it's amazing what they can do with lithographs also. So it's like a painting that has been protected. This is Silver City, showing details of where his stepfather, Billy Kid, was working in Georgetown. This is a huge map of southwestern New Mexico, very large. So it shows you the areas on the river, on the Rio Grande, great detail. And also in WS Ranch, where Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid had worked, and also in reserve with Alfego Baca fought all the Texans there. So it shows reserve. At this time, they're establishing the Northern New Mexico Stock Growers Association, and that's helping grow the industry by having representation and preventing stealing of cattle. And this is an advertisement for the Convention of Cattlemen in St. Louis in 1884. And all the listings of all the stock ranches were listed in these brand books, and it would have their brands, and they would be able to do roundups together and keep order in regards to the associations being established. This is a map of San Miguel County showing a land and livestock commissioner that is representing the area where he can establish consignment of your cattle and be able to take it through the packing house and get it on the railroads, and also invest in your inventory of cattle. Wyoming's going through rustling at this point. 1885, this GL Holt map shows Johnson County, and the newspaper talks about the Johnson County War. So a lot of at this time in 86, the next year, 86 and 87, we go through a terrible snowstorm for 2 years in the Northern Plains, and it wipes out many of these ranchers. And this is in 1885. Nemo Jr. is the data, provides statistics and data from the Commerce Department out of Washington, shows where all the Pacific Coast transportation is to get the cattle out of the markets. My great-great-grandfather, Ramsey Thomas, the last Indian agent of the Mandans at Fort Berthold, is in that range and is helping establish cattle herds for the Indian tribe. This is the stockyards in Indianapolis that are growing. This is the 86 Denver Union Stockyard brand book, and also shows advertisement for the Kansas City Stockyard. So they're all within promoting the commission that are representing different houses in the stockyards for capital investment. This is the Arbuckle advertisement for Texas and Indian Territory. Arbuckle's investing in ranches and packing houses. And this is a lithograph that was a card collection that they could collect of all the states in cattle. The Colfax County map shows the region that I live in Cimarron and Mora. Many of the families are being established here in Puerto de Luna. This particular letter comes from Denver, talking about the growth of Denver, and that you can't go wrong with an investment in Denver. You'll get your money back. And they're building like 1,500, 2,000 homes, and that there's great contractors. And so this is the Oklahoma country that shows the cattle trail of the Chisholm Trail. In addition, the western movement to Mexico, Baja, and Southern California as well as the Northwest. This is steer for Arkansas through the Iron Mountain route. I I used to have the Iron Mountain route map, and I couldn't wait to get rid of it because it's so hard to display. But this particular map, it's got a good interpretation. We got the Indian Territory, the Cherokee Strip. This was the second edition right before the land rush. So they show the Cherokee Strip. And one of the things I want to mention is the 5 civilized tribes were also in competition with the Texas and the Abilene men, and we're providing inventory for selling and finding buyers for their cattle. And we're also leasing permission to go through their lands. So they were some of the best cattlemen that were the Indian tribes of in the Oklahoma area. Cattle industry, 1895, shows Goodnight's ranch in 1873 down in Pueblo area. And then this is my great-great-great-grandfather, Amzi Thomas, on the far left in the beard with the Fort Berthold folks at the Mandan Indian Reservation at that time. Omaha is stockyards are growing. California, Santa Fe timetable 1900. And then the livestock industry book came out, and these are the top 4 cattlemen books that I have. And this was awarded, this was subscribed to William Clifford. And Clifford, Colorado is named after his ranch there. And this particular, having their name on the front cover and the subscription put them out of business. And Charles Martin was the secretary of the National Livestock Association at the time and came from Springer. And he was a big part of the growth of that organization, but it was an expensive book to publish. And then Springer's ditch system was created by Melvin Mills out of Springer. And I just purchased this recently, the W. Elliott Judge map, huge map of Arizona and California, and Arizona and New Mexico. And this is in the St. John's area, showing the cattle drive area, last areas of the Southwest that use cattle drives from Mount Magdalena all the way to St. John's and pushed cattle along the drive area that's now a BLM historical area, and you can still see the stockyards there in Magdalena where they would put them on the Santa Fe line. This interprets at this point Columbus, where Pancho Villa's gone across the border. Jim Easter, I'm writing the biography on, is in Douglas, Arizona now, and he's involved with as a police chief and judge, and population continues to grow west. This is from the Old Time Cowboys Reunion Association that was established here in at the Denver Stockyards. And this time, Quanah Parker was honored through a brief sketch of the Quanah, Acme, and Pacific Rail Line Company. So a lot of these books sometimes will have very detailed maps that you should look for. And this is showing the being able to provide railroad along the Denver-Fort Worth rail line, but more of a local rail hub for the ranchers. Now we're ending our presentation with Charles Goodnight's map of a Rand McNally map that J. Evetts Haley asked Charles Goodnight to mark where the Goodnight-Loving Trail was. And this was 1920s. And this is at the time when he's writing his biography. And I have one of 100 of these maps framed. And just a few years back, I helped guide teachers out of England that rode the entire Goodnight Loving Trail from Fort Belknap to Montana. And I took out 3 or 4 historic maps and I had them put the route down just like Charles Haley did and had them interpret their journey. And James Locke, who headed the group, rode the same horse the entire trip and never had to ask a rancher for permission except the first rancher. So each rancher would call the next rancher and say, they're coming your way, please take care of them. So this is where J.F. Haley talks about the entire trail in his message there. And then Texas Panhandle is interpreted in brochures now. And New Mexico put together a historic trails showing all the trails in New Mexico. And I was part of the team to establish the Goodnight Loving Trail crossing at Interstate I-40. So if you go from Oklahoma City, you'll pass the Chisholm Trail, you'll pass the Western Trail, and now you can pass the Goodnight Loving Trail. And then part of that project was interpreting the cowboys and conflict, trade exploration, and dino and digs into this pocket map that I designed. Got the idea of the color and everything, and wanted something that someone wouldn't throw away. So I want to thank Wes and Naomi for their fantastic customer service and your attention, and look forward to telling you some more stories in the future. Before they were domesticating their own cattle on the Native American reservations and on their homeland, they would kill the cattle that were coming across their land, and that was the practice. We do see other pueblos that have established their holdings and as stockholder members of the Central New Mexico Cattle Association, like Hagaman, Laguna. They were domesticating their own herds, and that was in 1884, 1885. So we've got ownership in stockyards and meatpacking establishments in a lot of these areas of the Southwest. We're seeing them package their own brands and don't need the middleman, and will have the product dressed with their own brand to represent their Native American culture. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Some people online, and thank you. So thank you all for coming here, Tim, and to listen to Tim. And we'll be back, if not October, definitely in November 7th for our next presentation. Thank you.